waging information warfare against pushers of fake news. You're listening to Real News with David Knight.
Welcome back. It's not just John McCain and Barack Obama who are part of the establishment and the phony two-party system that you see. It's also John McCain. I'm David Knight. We're going to break this down along with some other news stories here at the top of the hour. And then we're going to get into the real Russian collusion updates that we've got coming up. We're going to have some updates about Catalonia because there's going to be some developments there this weekend, I believe. Spain is going to push back against that. But there's also another referendum in northern Italy. You haven't heard about that. That's going to happen this weekend. They're going to vote on whether or not parts of northern Italy want to secede. See, this is a movement that George W. Bush can't shut down. He can't wish it away. He says, we can't wish away globalism. No, we're going to vote it away. We're going to shut it down. This is a worldwide movement. This isn't something that is just one man. President Trump was wise enough to understand this movement and to tap into it. And I believe that he philosophically agrees with it. He was against the so-called free trade agreements that eviscerated this country's economy in so many different ways. He was against that 25 years ago. So this was something that was already on his mind. He wasn't just looking out there and seeing what the zeitgeist was and tapping into it more wisely than these establishment politicians. He was part of that. But they still don't understand the forces that are at work that are going to sweep them and their legacy into the gutter where it belongs. And one of these people is John McCain. There's an article from Daily Caller. They say the number of people who could have provided BuzzFeed News with the copy of the dirty dossier about President Trump that was created by a British spy. You can't make this up, but they can make it up, okay? They can make this stuff up. Only a few people, they said, had access to the full document, which consists of 17 memos dated between June 20th, 2016 and December the 13th. One of those persons was John McCain, and we know that he sent somebody to the UK, one of his staffers, to go get that information, and he has admitted that he gave it to Director Comey, FBI Director Comey. And in a very contentious call with the Daily Caller on Wednesday, he said, I gave it to no one except for the director of the FBI. I don't know why you're digging this up now. Well, there's a good reason for this, because we're starting to look into what was really going on, the real collusion. The collusion between Republicans and Democrats and the deep state, the surveillance state, the military-industrial complex, all these people who were allied to make sure that we didn't get anybody from outside of their club in charge of things. And they would do whatever they needed to do. So I've got a poll up at Libertarian. You can find that. And I ask you, what do you think? Do you think that John McCain gave this to BuzzFeed? Or do you believe John McCain? Do you really believe that guy? So you can go to that poll, Libertarian. You can vote on that poll. Now, one of the things that I think is dragging us down is the moral and cultural vacuum. So they're trying to sweep away everything they can about history. That's why the attacks on the monuments. They're trying to tear down the foundations of this country. They're trying to tear down the customs of this country. As a matter of fact, one of the stories that I have here is about how some politically correct elementary school in Massachusetts is going to ban Halloween. They're going to call it Black and Orange Spirit Day. Black and Orange Spirit Day. Why? It's because of political correctness. You can't have people running around in costumes dressed like Indians, for example. I guess they could still dress like cowboys. That's not been banned yet. But you can't have them running around dressed like Indians. So they're just going to avoid the whole harmful controversy by shutting it down. That's what Marxism does. And of course, we have shut down our own foundations. We've shut down our foundations of Christianity. The Church of England reaches more people on social media than attend church. That's the vacuum. There's an overt effort to erase Christianity. But of course, the Christians are doing it to themselves as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. We ignore the rising monster in China at our peril. I'm David Knight, and yesterday I talked a good deal about this new leader, or I should say he's not actually a new leader, but he's assuming new powers. And the fact that he was doing this at their 5-year Communist Party meeting is a reminder that these guys are still communists. They have not given up on communism. And this new leader, President Xi, has come out to make himself a cult leader along the lines of Mao. And he's got some very important designs. And I just want you to take a look. We're just going to go over a few of these headlines here that are coming out. This is from Yahoo News. With tears and song, China welcomes Xi as a great and wise leader. See, that's the part of the cult of personality. And the interesting thing about it is that at this 5-year, again, like all good communists do, they have 5-year plans. They come up and they plan the economy once every 5 years, and they don't know. They don't have any mechanism for feedback because they don't have a free market. And a free market, it is constantly being adjusted by the choices of the consumers, by the votes of the consumers. But of course, in a communist organization, you don't really even get votes, right? You don't even get to choose that. And then once every 5 years, these guys get together and decide what they're going to do. But it's really more about who's going to be the leader and what powers that leader is going to have and what powers he's going to take away from the people there. And so this is at a Politburo standing committee that he heads. Again, another reminder that we're talking about communists here. We're talking about hardcore Marxists. These are not people who are sadder but wiser about socialism. No, they want it good and hard for their people. You may think that that's the case. No, they relaxed it for a while so that they could get more powerful. And again, when we talk about the difference between fascism and communism, and you've got these anti-faz out there, the anti-fascists, and you've got the people who are the anti-Maz, the anti-Marxists fighting it out, we understand that they eventually wind up in the same place. And the big disagreement between Hitler and Stalin was Hitler, although he called himself a socialist, a national socialist, he said that Stalin and the Russians had made the mistake, a tactical mistake, of taking all the property at the beginning instead of doing what he was going to do, and that was and the vitality of allowing some private ownership that he would tightly control. That's why we talk about economic fascism is like crony capitalism. Yes, there is the facade of private ownership, but those people are highly controlled, highly regulated, and the only people that are allowed to exist are the big corporations that work with Der Fuhrer, or the leader, as we have here, the great wise leader, as this communist is calling himself. And so the strategy, controlling everything, owning everything, was the same for both the fascists and for the communists. But Hitler wisely understood that he was going to get farther if he allowed some independence and some freedom from people. And so that's the enlightened idea of the Chinese. The Chinese look at this and say, you know, that cultural revolution where we starved 45 million people and said everybody's going to have to go work on the land and everything, that didn't work out too good. Maybe we need to wise up a little bit. Let's use let's lighten things up. Let's give people a little bit of a taste of a free market. Let's loosen some of the energy that individuals have, the creativity that individuals have. We'll do that for a while, and then we'll take most of the money that comes out of that, and we'll keep it within a small group of people, and then we'll take it back. So they kind of roll it back to the kind of national socialism that Hitler had. You know, what we've seen in China is a kind of fascism, a kind of corporate fascism, crony capitalism. And understand that built into the China price are things like stealing people's copyrights. You know, you tell people, come over here, we've got slave labor that we'll offer you. You know, just like Hitler. We got slave labor, you can build your factories here, you can get your stuff really cheaply, and then what they do is they steal the packaging, they steal the product design. Sometimes they just create phony products. I mean, we've had people who had their brake pads made in China, and some of the criminals in China would steal the packaging and then sell it back in the American market, and you couldn't tell it from the real stuff, except that those brakes weren't made out of real brake material. When people had a failure, it compounded the problem. Not only did the company not make any money for selling the real brakes, but then they got sued because people thought it was their product when it was this garbage knockoff that just had their packaging on it. But when you look at the China price, it's based on a lot of things. It's based on shutting down competition internally. It's based on predatory pricing. It's based on currency manipulation. It's based on piracy, whether it is intellectual property or physical property. It's piracy. So these people are criminals. They're criminal crony capitalists. They're criminal fascists. And now they've got a big pile of cash, and they're going to come back and try communism again. And here's what they're doing with their big pile of cash. China's Perfect World, its corporation in China, is going to give $250 million to Universal Pictures. And what are they going to make? They're going to make pictures that are going to propagandize America. It's going to sell us a happy version of China when this guy, quite frankly, President Xi, is going down the same path as the North Korean dictators, a path of totalitarianism, a path of total communism, and a path of worship me, I'm the leader. As I was saying, he goes on this Politburo committee, and he has a document that has his name on it. Xi Jinping, thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And as they point out in Yahoo, they say this will cement his power with his new eponymous slogan being incorporated into the party's constitution. So he's got his name there, and he's got his slogan, and it's going to be in the Constitution because he is the maximum leader, the great wise leader. And so they've got this big pile of cash. They're going to be propagandizing us through Hollywood. He's laid out, as Australia News points out, he's laid out a 30-year deadline to rule the world. He said, we're going to have the biggest military in the world. We're going to have comparable stuff in about 7 to 8 years, but then we're going to have the biggest military in the world by 2050. So it's his 30-year deadline to rule the world. I think that summarizes it pretty well, what we saw evolve in the last couple of days. And how is he going to do it? It's not just going to be with a big military. As the Free Thought Project points out, China is going to compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in their currency, in the yen, ending petrodollar as the world reserve currency. I said this yesterday. I said that is the goal. That is the goal of both Russia and China. And it is the goal of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, that group that has been put together. They've all talked about ending the dominance of the petrodollar. They understand that is the foundation, the economic foundation that they have to undermine. And you've also seen other countries that are enemies of America, Venezuela, Iran, who are also big energy producers, saying we're going to sabotage the petrodollar. And we have seen Saudi Arabia moving to Russia, moving closer to them, buying weapons from them, investing in Russia, and then in return getting Russian weapons. The same type of stuff they did as they established the petrodollar as the world currency. Now the Saudis are playing the same game with Russia to get leverage against us because they understand that the American energy industry is, if we get the government off of our back, if we stop these globalists in Washington, D.C., we have more energy in America than any of these people do. And by the way, we're the ones who discovered it. We're the ones who refined it. We're the ones who created the applications for it. We don't need the Saudis. We don't need their raw materials, and they haven't produced anything of any intellectual value in terms of using the raw materials that we possess in abundance. We have more coal than they have oil by many, many times. We have more of all of that stuff. Stay with us when we come back. I'm going to finish with what Rex Tillerson said. He said China is dumping enormous levels of debt on developing nations as they are undermining our petrodollar. It's economic warfare. It's going on now. It's been going on since Kissinger brought them into the globalist alliance. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. China is going to compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in their currency, thereby destroying the petrodollar as the world reserve currency. That's the prediction of Carl Weinberg, chief economist and managing director at High Frequency Economics. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And what else is up China's sleeve? I'm David Knight. We're going to get back to that in just a moment. Before we do, real quickly, I want to tell you about the sales that we have at Infowars.com. Your purchases of products that support your health are what support our operation here. You know, there's economic censorship that is coming at us in every direction, whether it is accepting ads on our website, putting ads for our products, our supplements, our water filters on other websites that try to shut that down, that try to demonetize, as you've seen. everyone on the conservative and libertarian spectrum. Now, the way we do is we sell these products to you directly. Your purchase of the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com is what keeps us going here. And so that's why they're eager to attack that as well. But we have the highest quality products that you'll find anywhere. One of those is Brain Force Plus, and it's 50% off, the deepest discount we have ever had on Brain Force Plus. It's a very popular nootropic, and it is something that I've said is my favorite supplement that we have here because I can really feel it. I would call it Brain Focus if I were going to name it. I would have suggested that's the name if I had tried it before we started selling it. We also have some other big discounts. We have 50% off Anthroplex as well, and we have 30% off Super Male Vitality. And until the end of this week, we have several very important supplements that in terms of iodine, selenium, and B12 that are all 40% off. Our Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, 40% off. Our BioTrue Selenium, we call it BioTrue because it is non-GMO. It's not synthetic. There's no fillers. And it is made from 100% organic mustard seed. That is 40% off, BioTrue Selenium. And Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formulation, that is also 40% off. And finally, we have 20% off of Infowars Wake Up America coffee. A great coffee, wonderful blend, and we have two different blends. Actually, we have Patriot Blend and Immune Support Blend. You can get 20% off of Infowars Wake Up America coffee if you put the code WAKEUP in at checkout. That's enter the code WAKEUP to get 20% off Infowars Wake Up America at checkout. Now, this prediction that came from Carl Weinberg, again, he's a economist, a managing director, and he was on CNBC. He said China will compel Saudi Arabia. How are they going to do that? How are they going to compel them to ignore the petrodollar, which has been the basis of our currency since we got off the gold standard in the 70s? We had Kissinger and Nixon take us off the gold standard, and Kissinger and Nixon created this alliance with Saudi Arabia that we call the petrodollar, and then Kissinger and Nixon opened up China, took them out of the dark ages that Mao had put them in, and now we've got this Chairman Mao wannabe, President Xi Jinping, who is basically making himself most excellent leader. No, actually, he isn't. That's was that Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? That would be good if they took the policy, be excellent to one another. But no, they don't have anything where they want to be excellent to anybody. It is a very monopolistic, very Marxist regime, and that may be their downfall. Marxism may be their downfall. It will be. It's been the downfall of everybody who has tried to embrace it. But they got off of it for a while, as I mentioned before. They went into a fascist economy, a crony capitalist economy, a pirate economy, and now they got a big wad of cash. They're going to be investing it in Hollywood. They got a 30-year deadline to rule the world with their military, but it's also an economic component. And Weinberg noted that China is poised to dominate the global landscape in terms of oil demand, since they will soon pass the United States as the biggest oil importer on the planet. And why is that? Well, that's because of things like the phony Paris Climate Agreement that allows them to continue to build fossil fuel plants that don't have any regulations on how dirty they are. Unlike the United States, we have highly regulated fossil fuel plants, and we would be restricted as to the number that we build, but they are adding massive amounts of numbers, and I don't have the stats in front of me. I should have gotten them before the program, but I think that they're adding more each year than we currently have. And so they are they're exploding in terms of their fossil fuel use. So they're going to be the biggest oil importer because they don't have the resources that we do. And so for both of those reasons, Saudi Arabia will have to pay attention to this, because 1 or 2 years from now, Chinese demand will dwarf U.S. demand. And he says, I believe that yuan pricing of oil is coming, and as soon as the Saudis move to accept it, as the Chinese will compel them to do, then the rest of the oil market will go along with them, and it will be the end of the petrodollar, and it will be the end of our fiat currency that doesn't have anything backing it up. And all those loans are going to come home. And at the same time, we have Rex Tillerson coming out saying yesterday that China is a predator for dumping enormous levels of debt on developing nations. Well, let's not just talk about developing nations. Let's talk about the enormous amount of debt that China owns on the U.S. Oh, we don't want to talk about that, do we? And quite frankly, they have looked at all the games that have been played by the globalist elite You know that whole idea of the petrodollar? Well, they're going to have a petro yuan instead. And they're going to take what we have been doing with the International Monetary Fund. Remember, it was Robert McNamara who went to the IMF, and he was accused of rent-seeking because he was going to third world countries, to developing nations, and he was encouraging them to buy, to not buy anything. He wasn't encouraging them to rebuild their infrastructure, as European nations had done after World War II. He was encouraging the developing nations to go into debt for their welfare states. Make a welfare state. Give money away to people. And go into debt to do it. And that was considered to be predatory. He was criticized. He says, you're rent seeking. You're trying to turn these people into perpetual renters. You're selling them debt so that they can create an ever expanding entitlement welfare state. And they're never going to be able to pay that off. Well, guess what? We've had people like the establishment, both Republicans and Democrats, who have done that to us. They have turned us into renters. We are now renters to China. We're now debtors to China. And it is a predatory practice that has been encouraged by those same people. They did it to third world countries, and they did it to the United States. Our debt is exploding. And who owns that debt? People like Saudi Arabia, people like China. And when the petrodollar collapses, they're going to call that in. That's going to be one of the ways they set up their supremacy. And so understand that the only hope that we've got is that Xi Jinping wants to be Mao Zedong. And that could be the fatal flaw. Because if he builds the foundation on that crumbling, shifting sand, it will fall. But we don't have a foundation anymore in the West either. In Europe, they point out the official governments there are erasing Christianity. Now, this is a report from WND. It's from the Gatestone Institute. And one of the things they said there, they say that the leaders of Europe are putting together documents and structures, and you see them in the European Parliament and the museums that they're opening. They even repudiate the Christian roots of Europe. And at the same time, they take great care not to offend Muslims, who they imagine will cheerfully adopt their secular, multicultural outlook. As a matter of fact, they hold Islam up as one of the founders of Europe, which is not true. And if we erase this foundation, we will crumble. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and joining us in studio is a very special guest, Gabe Hoffman. He's a hedge fund manager, a philanthropist. He's the owner of Esponda. Is that the correct pronunciation? Esponda Productions? Okay, good. And we're going to talk to him today, and he's in studio here at Infowars because of a very important documentary that hasn't really gotten much exposure. And it's kind of interesting when you contrast his documentary to a previous documentary done by the same director. Now, back in 2006, Amy Berg directed a film called, let's see, what's the name of this? Deliver Us from Evil. And that was widely acclaimed because it exposed pedophilia in the Catholic Church. She got an Oscar nomination for that. And then in 2014, Gabe produced a film with the same director, the same subject, the same crime, pedophilia, except this time it was about Hollywood. And they had problems getting distribution in Hollywood, because if you want to talk about crimes of the Catholic Church, that's one thing. You want to talk about the pedophilia of Hollywood, that's a completely different story. No. We're not interested in talking about that. So joining us now is Gabe Hoffman. In 2000, he was at the age of 22. Gabe Hoffman was the youngest hedge fund manager on Wall Street while employed by Welch Capital Partners, a New York-based money manager. So that's how he made his money, and then he got into producing films. How did that happen, Gabe?
Well, it was really funny. We didn't come out to make a film at all. I'm a research-based guy. I deal with the facts. And we just decided, we got the pitch from my friend Matt Valentinas, our co-producer. We went to school together, and he told me, look, I've worked in Hollywood for 15 years. I know that Hollywood has a big, big pedophile problem. I said, look, I'm not a filmmaker, but philanthropy, hey, doing good for society, I could be convinced. So we cut a small check just for all the research with the film company, Amy's Disarming Films. We hired private investigators, the whole 9 yards. It took months and months, and I got binders full of information about convicted Hollywood pedophiles, in some cases, still working in the industry.
Wow.
It's what you see in an open secret is less than 5% of the credible information that we got.
Wow.
So when I got all that stuff, I said, gosh, I lived a nice, normal childhood. I'm thankful for it. I've done well in life. Writing that check was one of the easiest things I've ever done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. You know, that's interesting. You didn't get into this because you wanted to be a big-time Hollywood producer like, let's say, Harvey Weinstein, who wanted all the perks of Hollywood. You didn't get into it because of that. Instead, you wanted to do some good. Well, and we've seen that from other people. And as soon as you get into it and you say, I'm going to take a look at pedophilia, they come after you. They shut down your funding. They do anything they can to. Did you have? I'm sure you had some opposition to that, some harassment from that before even the film was completed.
Yeah, it's not really a great pickup line with girls to say that you're a Hollywood producer and then get asked for what, and you have to tell them what you made the film about. but yeah, to your point, I was lucky that we didn't have to rely on anybody else for funding. Once that research happened, and once we got that information, the camera started rolling. I was supposed to be just the anonymous financial backer. I don't do TV. I'm not a film guy. I'm an anonymous hedge fund guy. And by the way, I'd like to give a shout out to my big government overlords, the SEC, that I'm not here marketing my fund. In case you're watching, kiss, kiss, I am compliant with all of your rules and regulations. My fund is closed. We are not taking in any new investors. And you know that because like every other hedge fund out there, you sent people who camped out at our offices for a week just last year. And we were totally clean as we've always been. That's
the way they get people, getting down into the minutiae of the regulations. And I think that's one of the things, when we look at what's going on with the ever-expanding investigation of President Trump, once they get into financial crimes, and it's kind of interesting, the financial crimes are so complicated, and that's what they actually took down the long-term pedophile who was the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, the longest-serving Speaker of the House for the GOP. They took him down not because of his pedophilia. As a matter of fact, he probably got that position. I'm sure he got that position because of his pedophilia. But they took him down with financial crimes because he withdrew his own money out of the bank. Of course, in a way, he was kind of hoisted by his own petard because it was under his leadership that they put those rules in that are patently absurd. It doesn't have anything to do with money laundering. They know once the money is in the bank, I mean, they could put in structuring if they wanted to put it under the pretense of controlling money laundering. They could do that when people are putting the money into the bank. But pulling the money out, why should that be an issue? Why should that be something? But that's what they took him down for. And one of the things, too, and you can talk about this with the film here, the pedophiles get away with this because they have such a short statute of limitations that once you find out about it, then they basically say, well, it's more than 2-3 years, so nothing can be done to these people about it. That's why they came after Hastert the way they did.
Well, it's amazing. Big government and through their mouthpieces in big media, they would make you think that it's absolutely necessary, that it is so complicated. That's the story they tell you, that you can't regulate the financial system simply, that you need hordes, tens of thousands of new SEC agents and all kinds of stuff just to regulate the financial sector. I'm here to tell you that they're wrong about that. And I'll give you a really simple example. You've heard of Bernie Madoff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That was the single biggest hedge fund fraud in history. And it happened right before President Obama and all the Democrats took power in 2008. Well, guess what? Bernie Madoff was something called a registered investment advisor. Okay. And that means there's a whole lot of rules and regulations and all that. Now, what that was designed for, it was back in the 1930s, and it was designed for people who were going to give financial advice to individuals. In other words, you come in, and they tell you, okay, we're looking at your stuff, and to plan for retirement and this and that, you should do this and the other thing. It's, okay, you need to have a lot of certifications for all that, and you're dealing with mom and pops and so on and so forth. Well, even Bernie Madoff, when the SEC come to visit him every year for a few days, they still missed his fraud. You'd say, why? Very, very simple. Just like you and anybody else would keep their money in a bank account, a hedge fund manager keeps their stocks, their bonds, whatever they own, currencies, or whatever they're short, That's all kept at something called a prime brokerage, like a JP Morgan or a Goldman Sachs. In my case, Bank of America. It's just a term for a hedge fund's bank account, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody is checking your books at the end of every year, your auditors and your accountants and all that, well, guess what? They call your prime broker and they get the documents and say, oh, yeah, okay, he's got what he really says he has in there. Very simple. And 99.9% of all hedge funds use a big Wall Street bank prime broker so that somebody can check their deposits as it were, right? Mm-hmm. Bernie Madoff was his own prime broker.
And they allowed that.
Absolutely. and not only that, so simple.
He has a couple of different hats.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, okay.
So he could just make up whatever deposit sheets he wanted. So the simple way to regulate things when you find out there's a Bernie Madoff is the government should go around and say, wait a minute, here's what the 99% of honest people do just because they're honest in the industry. And we'll make that a rule. We'll codify best practices, right? Common sense that, hey, if you want to be a fund, you can't pretend that you're your own bank. You can't be your own prime broker. Mm-hmm. That's not what they did. Obama and his Democrat cronies passed a big Dodd-Frank, as you know, and among a lot of other things they whacked in the financial system was hedge funds. And they said, everybody now, even though hedge funds are just a toy for the rich to, put in a pool and invest and hopefully make more money, they decided to jam the registered investment advisor thing on us.
Wow.
And now
That's a story that we haven't heard too much. We've heard what they did to the small banks, basically making it impossible for them to participate in mortgages and driving many of them out of business and making it very difficult for consumers to get loans. But I hadn't heard that about the hedge funds. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk to Gabe Hoffman. We're going to have a clip of the film Open Secrets, the story that Hollywood doesn't want you to see. I'm David Knight. We'll be right back.
I think every little kid dreams about being famous and being in movies.
This is California. This is where you make it. This is where it all starts.
You'll get signed by a label. You can star on Disney Channel. What kid wouldn't want that, right?
I remember you asked me if I ever did anything with the guy before. I was not interested at 12.
You're not recording this, right?
Looks like an angel.
Hollywood doesn't have any system in place to protect anybody, and children are way down on that list.
Children need management just like everybody else.
Walk like an angel.
Everybody liked him.
He became part of the family.
In the beginning, it was happy, and then things started changing.
Oh, you talk like an angel.
They pick on people who they know will be victims.
You have an adult who is manipulating the child.
Like an angel.
Just getting, hired on the spot like that. That had never happened before.
It was obvious that something was going on.
You fool me.
The party made me feel uncomfortable. There were lots of drugs available, and there were young teenage boys.
I remember being scared.
He just told me this is what you have to do.
A number of boys told me to point the gun at them just like that.
He said, do you not understand the power I have?
You're the devil in disguise.
Wow, that's a very powerful trailer. You're listening to the trailer for Open Secret, and we're talking to the producer, Gabe Hoffman. And, of course, Hollywood did not want this story told. That's one of the reasons that you need to see it. Because even though they had given an Oscar nomination to the same director, Amy Berg, on the same subject about the same crime, pedophilia, when it was an exposure of the Catholic Church, when they did this film that was about the rampant pedophilia in Hollywood, Hollywood didn't want to distribute it, did they, Gabe?
No, Hollywood did everything they could at every step of the way to try to keep this film from the American people. And every step of the way we fought them. And now it's out there.
So the key thing that they did to oppose you, because you talked about the fact that they couldn't shut down your funding like they do for some people who crowdsource something. You had, as a hedge fund manager, somebody came to you and said, hey, there's this problem in Hollywood. And you know, I don't know. I don't want to be a film producer. You weren't into being a Harvey Weinstein type of guy, right? So it's like, I don't want to become powerful and have starlets, falling at my feet or whatever. But you said, look, yeah, I'll do that as a philanthropist. And so you bankrolled it. They couldn't come after you financially because you had enough money that you could produce this film on your own, so they couldn't shut it down from that angle. What they did, though, was after you got the film done, they tried to block distribution, didn't they? Tell us what happened with that.
Every step of the way. So at a film festival, if you're just a couple college grads and you've got a $50,000 from friends and family, they'll let you in with your documentary, and you'll maybe be in the corner somewhere. You won't be on the main screen. So no less than 3 film festivals we got into, and then weeks later, when the higher-ups found out from the Hollywood bigwigs, we got kicked out. It was unprecedented.
Wow.
Of course, that didn't stop us. We took it to theaters anyway ourselves.
Yeah, and we've seen that happen as well with another controversial topic, vaccines. You know, the vaxxed. You know, eventually, you know, Robert De Niro said, yeah, I think we should. And then the filmmakers came out and said, no, we don't want that shown. Of course, there was pressure, we believe, from other people to shut that down. And that's the way that they do it. They get you kicked out of the film festivals, and that helps to keep you from getting any distribution. So that was in 2014, and then what happened?
So that was actually in 14 and then in 15. And by the way, the first festival we got into, Doc NYC, sold out on 2 days' notice, and it was on the front page of Drudge.
Wow.
So they just couldn't keep us down no matter what.
Well, it's a very sensational topic. And it's something that is really visceral. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people, and talk to us about this, a lot of people might be squeamish to look at a film about this. That it's like maybe there's something in their past where they've been a victim and they don't want to see what's going on. That's a big part of the problem, that people are very uncomfortable talking about it because it's such a heinous crime. And they don't want to, engage the subject. Tell us how you engage that sensitive subject.
Amy did an amazing job. There is no explicit language in the film describing anything that happened. Don't get me wrong, the things that we reveal in the film itself about the dark secrets of Hollywood, we expose a big-time child agent as a pedophile, and we show pedophiles that are convicted, that are still working in Hollywood. All that will really disturb you and what it does to these poor kids. But what you don't see is any sort of graphic description of any sort of the actual crimes themselves and the acts. Yeah. It's PG-13, but you'll see a lot worse stuff on network TV at about 9 o'clock at night.
So it's not something that's going to appeal to a pedophile, but it's something that people need to understand. And that's an important distinction. I mean, some people get very prurient in their depiction of things, which, that's good that you avoid that. But what we heard in that trailer, the guy saying, yeah, this guy shows up, he was hired on the spot. That never happens. That was kind of unusual. Another guy says, yeah, he pointed a gun at their face, and said, do this or that. I mean, that's the level of corruption. We're seeing this with Harvey Wood, okay, where they're taking all the sins of Hollywood and they're putting them on this one scapegoat that they're then going to send over the cliff or whatever, right? And then that's going to basically exonerate them from all this. But this is something that is far more pervasive, I should say, and far more perverse. That's going on in Hollywood that hasn't even been exposed yet, that's talked about in your documentary, Open Secret.
You've even had A-listers come out just in the last couple of days and talk about what happened to them, even folks like Jennifer Lawrence when she was 15 years old, and so on and so forth. And there's been about 10 like that.
And it was a year and a half ago that we had the tweet out there by Elijah Wood, which I believe was, he came back and said, well, I was basing it on seeing the film Open Secret or whatever. But, we've got others who have talked about this. And, Corey Feldman was talking about what happened to his a really good friend, Corey Haim. And that all started coming out about the same time as your film was coming out, but everybody kind of tamped that down. They said, no, we're not going to listen to Corey Feldman, and we're not going to let your film get distributed.
And we went to the highest journalistic standards in an Open Secret. The big Hollywood people that we exposed didn't have a dang thing on us. We never got sued. We never even got a credible threat of suit. And by the way, there's Hollywood bigwigs that are in there that we didn't even know about, but when we got threatened, we said, okay, we'll go and tag him. You ever seen the film Grease?
Oh, yeah.
Of course. So the director, Randall Kleiser, well, 20 years later, I guess his career took a tumble, and he was a director for some of this pedophile ring den's little web shows. So he's hanging around with all these pedophiles. Well, his attorney, Michael Donaldson, the biggest, Hollywood sort of firm out there, sent us something really threatening saying, well, he's, in there for 5 seconds. We didn't even know he was in there. So we wrote him back and said, hey, go pound sand. Now we're going to put a tag on him so everybody knows.
That's great. That's great. So talk about some of the people in just the last week or so, besides Jennifer Lawrence, that have come out talking about this, because I think that there's going to be either one or two ways that this is going to roll. Either they're going to try to just confine it around Harvey and just, you know, the Weinstein group, maybe his brother too, they're going to drag into it now because that started going back and forth. But maybe they're going to get a little bit more broad on this. Maybe it will get to some of the people, like you said, like Jennifer Lawrence, who they came after when she was just 15 years old.
Or Reese Witherspoon when she was 16, who was courageous enough to talk this week. Or Michaela Maroney, who was part of the Fierce Five that won the gold medal for the U.S. women's gymnastics team. This goes deep and this goes broad through all aspects of entertainment. And you're going to hear about this from not just, when you think Hollywood, it's not just film, it's music, it's theater, it's sports, it's all over the place. And you're seeing the dam breaking now. These big, powerful people, they can't hold it back anymore. And that's part of why we put this out there to the public. You know that over 1 million views just in the week that we made this free?
Wow.
I mean, these powerful Hollywood people are opening up their Twitter feeds, and I kid you not, thousands and thousands and thousands of people calling them out by name, hitting them with their @ symbols right to their face.
Wow. And where's it free?
It's free on Vimeo. You can get at that at our Twitter @AnOpenSecret.
Great. You know, one of the things, too, going back and tying this to Harvey Weinstein, when this all started breaking, I went back and found an op-ed piece that he had written in support of Roman Polanski, of all people, right? And, you know, he said his so-called crime, he's paid his dues for his so-called crime. I mean, that was the words of Harvey Weinstein. And this was the rape of an underage girl.
Drugging.
And let him come back. And the reason that he gave was because Roman Polanski is true to his art. That's the excuse.
Drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl is a supposed crime for which he was convicted in a U.S. court and then fled the country. And then he gets awards at those big, you know, Hollywood things. And it's so funny how they all stand up and clap to an empty screen because he's not allowed back in the country to receive it in person.
Yeah. His so-called crime. That's amazing. That's amazing. But, of course, it's really about the power. And that's why these people hang out with Hollywood. Can you stay with us one more segment?
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to be right back. We're going to be talking more to Gabe Hoffman. He is the producer of Open Secret. A very important film for you to see, and it's going to be free till October the 22nd. So we're going to talk to him about that more in the next segment. I'm David.